We saw a figure crouched on a boulder, but its shadow stretched uphill. At first, I thought the slope was playing tricks on my eyes. The way the forest floor tilted, how the light filtered through layers of wet leaves and moss, flattening everything into a dim, greenish wash. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that something was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with perspective. The shadow wasn't just angled oddly, climbed. It stretched up the incline behind the figure, thin and elongated, like a spill of ink defying gravity. The figure itself remained still, hunched low on the rock, its back to us. But the shadow kept moving, inching higher along the slope as though it were being pulled. "Do you see that?" I asked. Lena didn't answer right away. The forest had a way of swallowing sound, of making even close voices seem far off. When she finally spoke, her voice came from somewhere slightly behind where she stood. "Yeah," she said. "Don't call out to it. We hadn't planned to come this far in." The trail had been clear at first, packed earth, the occasional marker tied to a branch. But the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to soften around us. The ground grew spongy with moss, swallowing our footsteps. The light dimmed, though it was barely past noon, and the sounds, what little there were, felt misplaced. A twig snapping too far to the left, a rustle that echoed after it should have died. We'd noticed it gradually, like a pressure building behind the eyes. Something was off, but not enough to stop. Not yet. Now we stood at the base of a shallow rise, staring at the figure. "Maybe it's another hiker," I said, though I didn't believe it. The posture was wrong. Too still. Too compact, like it had been folded into itself. Lena shifted beside me, her boot pressed into the moss with a soft, wet sound that seemed to linger longer than it should have. "Watch the shadow," she whispered. It moved again, not in response to the figure before it. A thin limb of darkness slid further uphill, branching slightly as it passed over a protruding rock. It didn't bend around the terrain. It climbed over it, stretching in a way that suggested depth, as if the shadow had its own body separate from the one casting it. The figure didn't react. A faint snap echoed somewhere behind us. We both turned instinctively, but there was nothing there. Only trees, their trunks slick with moisture, their bases swallowed by thick moss. When we looked back, the figure had shifted. Just slightly, its head angled a few degrees to the side. The shadow, however, had already moved. It recoiled down the slope, shrinking rapidly, then split. One part snapping back to align with the figure, the other lingering halfway up the incline, twitching like a severed tendon. I felt my stomach drop. "That's not—" I started, but the words caught. The air felt thicker, harder to push through. Lena grabbed my sleeve. "We should go." We turned, but the forest behind us looked different. The path we'd come from was gone. Not just obscured, gone. The trees stood closer together, their trunks forming a loose barrier. The ground sloped differently than I remembered, dipping where it should have risen. "Did we come up this way?" I asked. Neither of us answered. A sound reached us then, our own footsteps. Soft, rhythmic, approaching from somewhere deeper in the trees. We froze. The steps were slightly out of sync, as if someone were trying to match our pace but couldn't quite get it right. Each footfall came a fraction too late, echoing our earlier movements. "Don't move," Lena said. We stood perfectly still. The footsteps continued for 2 more beats, then stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. When I risked a glance back toward the boulder, the figure was no longer there. But the shadow was. It lay stretched across the slope, detached now, its edges rippling faintly. As we watched, it began to rise, not lifting off the ground, but pulling itself upward along the incline, thickening as it went. It reached the crest and spilled over. For a moment, we lost sight of it. Then it appeared again behind us, not cast by anything, not attached, just there. It spread across the forest floor like a stain, branching between roots, climbing over fallen logs. Where it touched the moss, the green dulled, darkened, as if the life were being pressed out of it. "Run," I said. We moved without thinking, pushing through the trees. The ground felt uneven, shifting underfoot. Once I stumbled, and for a split second, I could have sworn the earth tilted the wrong way, sending me forward instead of down. The forest distorted as we ran. Branches seemed to stretch just out of reach, then snap back. The light flickered, not like passing clouds, but like something blinking. Our footsteps echoed ahead of us now, leading us deeper, guiding us along a path we couldn't see. Behind us, the shadow followed. I didn't have to look to know. I could feel it, an absence of warmth, a pressure against my back, like a breath that never quite touched. We broke into a small clearing. At its center stood another boulder, and on it crouched the figure. It was facing us now. I couldn't make out its features. Its form seemed to blur at the edges, as if the air around it refused to settle. But I could tell it was watching. The shadow stretched uphill. Again. But there was no slope. The ground was flat. Still, the shadow climbed, rising into nothing, elongating into a thin, wavering line that disappeared into the canopy. The figure tilted its head. This time, its shadow moved after. It recoiled slightly, then surged forward, splitting into multiple strands that lashed outward, touching the trees, the ground, us. When one brushed my leg, the world lurched. For a heartbeat, I was somewhere else. I saw the forest from above, the trees forming a rough circle around us. Within that circle, the shadows of the trees didn't match their shapes. They twisted, overlapping, converging toward the center, toward the boulder, toward the figure. Then I was back. Lena screamed. One of the shadow strands had wrapped around her ankle, not tightly, but enough to anchor her. She kicked at it, but her foot passed through as if it were smoke. Yet it held. The figure on the boulder shifted, rising slightly from its crouch. Its outline flickered. For a moment, I saw something else layered over it. Multiple forms, overlapping, as if the figure were made of several bodies trying to occupy the same space. The shadow tightened, not around Lena, but around the ground beneath her, pulling. She slid an inch toward the boulder. "No," I said, grabbing her arms, pulling back. The forest responded. A low, resonant creak moved through the trees, like wood bending under strain. The light dimmed further, narrowing our world to the clearing and the thing at its center. The shadow split again. More strands reached out, touching the surrounding trunks. Where they made contact, the trees seemed to lean inward, subtly, almost imperceptibly, closing the space. Hurting us. "It's not chasing us," Lena gasped. "It's guiding," I finished. The realization settled cold in my chest. We hadn't wandered off the trail. We'd been led. The figure straightened a little more. Its head snapped to the side, too fast, too sharp. Behind us, something moved. I turned. Another shadow stood between the trees, not cast standing. It had depth now, a suggestion of limbs, of a torso, but no source. It leaned forward slightly, as if observing. Then another appeared. And another. They didn't emerge from anything. They were simply there, filling the spaces between the trunks, forming a loose perimeter. The first shadow, the one from the boulder, tightened its hold on the ground, pulling us another inch forward. I understood then. The figure wasn't the center. It was the anchor. The shadows were the forest. And they were gathering. Lena's grip on my arm tightened. "We're not leaving, are we?" I didn't answer. The figure's shadow surged upward, climbing into the canopy, branching out like roots in reverse. The light above flickered, then dimmed as if something vast had spread across it. The other shadows leaned closer. Our own shadows stretched unnaturally, pulling away from our feet, inching toward the boulder. When mine detached completely, I felt it. A hollowing, as if something essential had been unhooked. The figure on the boulder tilted its head again. And this time it moved before its shadow did. Just slightly, just enough to show it had learned. The shadows closed in. And the last thing I realized, as the forest drew us fully into its center, was that the path out hadn't disappeared. It had been taken, carried away, piece by piece, by the shadows that used to belong to us. The wind stopped, but the trees kept swaying. It happened mid-step. One moment, there was the steady push of air against my jacket, the soft hiss of leaves brushing each other high above. The next, everything fell still. So abruptly it felt as if something had sealed the forest inside a glass container. No wind, no drift of air. And yet the trees did not settle. They continued to move, their upper branches rocking in slow, deliberate arcs, out of sync with anything natural. The motion didn't fade or stutter like the last breath of a passing gust. It persisted, measured and even, as if guided by a rhythm I couldn't hear. I stopped walking. Behind me, Owen took 2 more steps before noticing. His boots pressed into the damp soil with a soft, delayed crunch that seemed to arrive a second after his foot hit the ground. "Why'd you stop?" he asked. His voice felt misplaced. It didn't echo properly. The sound reached me, then repeated faintly from somewhere off to the right, like the forest was testing it. "Listen," I said. He tilted his head. We both stood there, breathing in the dense, wet air. The smell of moss and decaying leaves clung to the back of my throat. Somewhere far off, a branch creaked, but the sound stretched, warped, as if pulled too thin. Then Owen frowned. "There's no wind." "Yeah." Above us, the canopy shifted. Branches swayed, leaves trembling, entire trunks bending slightly at their midpoints. But the movement didn't travel through the forest the way wind does, in waves or ripples. Each tree seemed to move on its own timing, its own axis independent of everything around it. A birch to my left leaned forward. Not much, just enough that its pale bark caught more of the dim light filtering down. Then it eased back. A pine further ahead swayed in the opposite direction, its needles whispering together despite the stillness. The sound came late, like an echo that hadn't found its source yet. Owen shifted his weight. "That's not right." "No," I said. We had been following a trail or what passed for one this deep in. Faint markers, occasional breaks in the undergrowth. But now, looking around, I couldn't see anything that resembled a path. The forest had thickened. Trees stood closer together than I remembered, their trunks dark with moisture, their roots bulging through the soil like knotted veins. The ground felt softer, less stable, as if it had been disturbed. "Did we veer off?" Owen asked. "I don't think so." A low rustle passed through the leaves above us. But it didn't match the motion. The sound came from directly overhead, while the nearest branches moved somewhere to the left. The disconnect made my stomach tighten. "Okay," Owen said, forcing a small laugh. "Weird, but it's probably just." A sharp crack cut him off. Came from behind us. We both turned. Nothing had changed. The trees stood as they had, swaying gently, each in its own slow pattern. But the crack echoed again, softer this time, then again, fading as if it were moving away from us. Except it wasn't. The third repetition came from closer. I felt a prickle along my arms. "It's not echoing," I said quietly. "It's repeating." Owen didn't respond. He was staring at the ground. I followed his gaze. A root near his boot shifted. It didn't snap or break the surface. It simply moved, sliding a fraction of an inch through the soil, as if something beneath had adjusted its grip. We both stepped back. The ground held, but the sensation lingered. An impression of something vast beneath us, not stirring exactly, but aware. Above, the trees swayed in unison for the first time. Not all of them, just a cluster ahead, their trunks bending forward together, then easing back, then forward again. The motion was slow, almost hesitant, like a breath. "Do you see that?" Owen whispered. I nodded. The trees leaned forward once more, a little farther this time. Their branches dipped lower, narrowing the space between them. Leaves brushed against each other with a dry, papery sound that didn't match their damp appearance. Then they drew back. Another breath. The rhythm spread. Tree by tree, the surrounding forest began to synchronize. What had been scattered, independent movement became something coordinated, deliberate. Trunks tilted in sequence, branches lowering and rising in a pattern that felt too regular to ignore. The forest was moving, not reacting, acting. "We should go," Owen said. "Which way?" He hesitated. There was no clear answer. Every direction looked the same: dense growth, uneven ground, shifting shadows. The dim light filtering through the canopy flickered subtly, not from clouds or sun, but from the movement above, as if the forest itself were controlling how much light reached us. "Back," he said finally, though neither of us knew where that was. We turned and started walking. Our footsteps sounded wrong. Each step landed, then echoed a beat later from somewhere ahead, as if the ground were repeating us, guiding us forward. The delay made it hard to keep a steady pace. I found myself hesitating, trying to match the rhythm, then realizing it wasn't ours to match. The trees leaned as we passed. Not much, just enough that I noticed. A branch dipped lower near my shoulder, then rose again once I'd moved on. Another brushed the top of Owen's pack, its leaves dragging lightly before lifting away. "They're adjusting," he said. "To us," I replied. The realization settled heavily. The forest wasn't just moving. It was responding. A whisper threaded through the leaves. Soft, almost too soft to hear. But there was no wind. The sound came in fragments, overlapping, like voices speaking just out of sync. I couldn't make out words, but there was a cadence to it, a repetition that felt intentional. Owen stopped. "Do you hear that?" "Yes." The whispers grew slightly louder. Not in volume, but in clarity. For a moment I thought I caught something recognizable. A syllable, maybe two, but it slipped away before I could grasp it. The trees ahead leaned inward, not swaying now, reaching. Their branches extended toward each other, narrowing the space between their trunks. The path, if there had ever been one, closed. "Go around," Owen said. We veered to the side. The movement followed. Trees shifted subtly, their positions altering just enough to redirect us. Not blocking exactly, but guiding, steering, hurting. My chest tightened. "It's moving us," I said. Owen didn't argue. We kept walking, faster now, though the ground seemed to resist. Roots rose slightly beneath the surface, creating uneven ridges that caught our feet. The soil felt looser, as if it had been turned recently. The whispers changed. They aligned. No longer overlapping randomly, they fell into a pattern, short bursts, spaced evenly, repeating. A signal. The trees responded. Their swaying intensified, no longer gentle arcs but deeper bends, their trunks flexing in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The motion traveled outward from us, spreading through the forest in widening circles. We reached a small clearing, or what should have been one. The space was there, an opening in the canopy, a patch of dim light, but the ground was wrong. It rose and fell in slow, subtle waves. Not enough to knock us off balance, but enough to see, enough to feel. Owen stepped onto it and froze. "It's moving," I followed. The sensation was unmistakable. The earth wasn't solid. It shifted beneath us in a slow, rhythmic pulse, like something breathing far below the surface. The trees around the clearing leaned inward. All of them, their branches lowered, forming a loose canopy within the canopy, enclosing us. The light dimmed further, reduced to a thin, greenish glow. The whispers stopped. Silence rushed in. Then, from somewhere deep beneath us, a sound rose. Low, resonant. It wasn't a voice. It was too vast for that. It vibrated through the ground, through our feet, up into our bones. A single, sustained tone that seemed to stretch on without end. The trees stilled. Completely. No swaying. No rustling. Just that sound. Then, one by one, they began to tilt. Not randomly. Together. All of them leaning in the same direction, their trunks angling toward a single point beyond the clearing. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if they were bowing or pointing. I followed the line they formed. It led deeper into the forest, to a place where the light didn't reach at all. The ground beneath us shifted again, stronger this time. A pull, not downward, forward. Owen grabbed my arm. Don't! The word cut off as the sound beneath us changed. It split, layered, multiple tones rising and falling in sequence, forming something almost like a pattern. Like language, the trees responded instantly. They straightened, then bent again, sharper this time, their movement matching the rhythm of the sound. Branches creaked, leaves shivered, trunks flexed in precise intervals. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It was communication. I felt it then. Not just the movement, not just the sound, but an awareness pressing in from all sides. The sense that whatever lay beneath the forest, whatever guided the trees and shaped the ground, knew exactly where we stood. Knew we were listening. The tones shifted again. Closer now. More focused. And as the trees leaned once more, all pointing toward that same dark place beyond the clearing, I understood. They weren't swaying. They were answering. And something deep under the roots and soil was asking,